It's my coach used to say it's go-to time. It's go time now.
Welcome to the Kyle Olson Show. As if the first presidential debate wasn't enough news for the week, President Trump and the First Lady have been diagnosed with coronavirus. Joining me now with the latest, and I should say that we're recording this Friday morning, is former White House physician Dr. Ronny Jackson. So, Dr. Jackson, what's the latest on the president's condition?
So, Kyle, the way I understand it, and I have talked to people at the White House this morning briefly, but the president's asymptomatic. He got diagnosed. He and the First Lady were diagnosed as a result of being tested because of an exposure. As you may have heard, Hope Hicks had developed some symptoms. He tested her. She tested positive. She's one of the president's closest confidants and, is with him all the time. So, of course, there was a lot of exposure to Hope. So once Hope was tested as positive and she was symptomatic as well, they tested the president and the First Lady, and they both tested positive. But both the president and the First Lady are asymptomatic, which I think is very good news. Most people in the president's category, and when I say category, I mean 74-year-old man with no comorbidities. He doesn't have any heart disease, lung disease, any immunocompromise, anything like that, any of the stuff that would put him at risk. 99.5% of all the people in that category will recover from this spontaneously. Most will just get minor symptoms, or actually most won't get symptoms at all. They won't even know they had it. And the ones that do get symptoms would just get minor symptoms. So I think it's good news that the president's asymptomatic. This was an incidental finding as a result of exposure. I fully expect the president to remain asymptomatic and for this to resolve itself in the next 7 to 10 days. And I don't think it'll be full 10 days. People are talking about him being in quarantine for 10 days, and that's actually not going to be necessary because the quarantine is set up for people who were exposed but tested negative and don't have any symptoms, and they're in quarantine monitoring to make sure to see if they do develop symptoms and do test positive. But the president has tested positive. So they'll continue to aggressively test him every day. And when he has 2 negative tests that are 24 hours apart, he should be cleared to resume his normal activities. And I think that'll be less than 10 days.
And my understanding is the protocol for the White House is basically everyone is tested every day, people who are visiting the White House, et cetera. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir. Everyone is tested every day that works in the West Wing. And anyone that has any contact with the president, if you're coming over from the Eisenhower Executive Office building or coming from off campus and you have a meeting with the president, you have to get tested before you go over to the West Wing and meet with the president. So the testing at the White House is very aggressive. And that's also a good sign. That tells us that, we've caught this very early in the course of the illness, just by the nature of testing every day. So I think that, that's good news as well.
So where do the administration and the campaign go from here?
Well, I think the administration continues on. The president doesn't need to be out on outside the White House to do his job. He can do his job effectively at the White House. I've been talking a little bit about it today, and I've been saying that the president is going to be effectively quarantined because he's not going to be quarantined like you and I would. If you or I were at the White House and we tested positive, we'd be told to go home, stay there until we can document that we're not infectious anymore. We don't have it anymore. The president can't do that. He's the commander in chief. He's the leader of the free world. He's our head of state. So he has to continue to do his job. So he'll continue to do his job, and I'm sure he'll work out of the Oval Office some. He'll work from upstairs in the residence. He'll be surrounded by key people in the administration, essential people. The White House will pare it down to where only essential people are in the West Wing and around the president. But certain people will have to be there for him to do his job. The chief of staff, the national security advisor, people like that, the military aide, the doctor, those people are going to have to be around the president. They'll take precautions. They'll wear masks. They'll keep their distance and social distance, and they'll wash their hands aggressively and things of that nature. But I think that he will continue to run our country without missing a lick. And, the campaign's a different story. The campaign's is going to be on hold for a few days here. I'm sure he'll be able to get some stuff done over the phone and on TV and in front of the press. But getting out on the campaign trail, and going to the rallies that are his thing that he enjoys so much, getting out and mixing with the folks, which is what he's best at. He'll have to wait on that for just a little bit until this clears. So it'll affect the campaign more than it will affect his ability to do his job as president.
Sure. And he was scheduled to be in Florida on Friday night and then 2 stops in Wisconsin on Saturday, but there's been a particularly nasty reaction among leftists on social media. For example, 39 minutes after the president tweeted the news of the diagnosis, the Washington Post tweeted an opinion piece that in the headline was, quote, "Imagine what it will be like to never have to think about Trump again." But what's your reaction to these very nasty responses?
Yeah, I don't know what to say about that. I'll be honest with you. The far left and the liberal press, I've been so disgusted with them for so long. Nothing surprises me from them. And I mean, they hate this president so bad they've completely dehumanized him. And it's disgusting, the stuff that they say online and the stuff that they write. And it's un-American. I mean, for anybody to be wishing harm upon our president, it's just profoundly un-American. And I'm just pretty disgusted with it. They'll do anything to serve their political purposes. This is all about trying to use this to manipulate the unsolicited mail-in ballots, the arguments for unsolicited mail-in ballots, so that they harvest these ballots and fill them out for the Democrats and steal the election. They think that this is going to prop up their argument for that. This is going to give them fodder to turn off the next debate, so that Vice President Biden doesn't have to expose himself again and potentially reveal some of the issues he's having. So I just think it's disgusting that they use something like this for their political purposes. And I mean, maybe you would think that they'd start trending that way after a few days, but for crying out loud, right out of the gate, they can't even wish him well before they start trying to cut his head off. It's disgusting.
So let's talk about that first debate. It seemed to me that the president did well. He was very combative. He was very aggressive and assertive. The Biden campaign and, well, I should say his supporters have said, well, there shouldn't be any more debates. I mean, clearly this was a disaster and a train wreck, and there shouldn't be any more debates. It seems to me someone's side who says that doesn't think he did very well. But what was your reaction to the first debate?
I agree with you. I think he did better than they expected him to do, but I think that was in part because he didn't talk as much as he could have or he should have. And I think they see the danger in what happened. There were a few times, I think, honestly, if Chris Wallace and or the president hadn't jumped in to make a comment and had let Biden continue with another one or two sentences, he would have gone down that path where he just got lost and he didn't know what he's talking about. And I think it would have been really revealing. So I think that they feel like they dodged a bullet because there was so much back and forth that it covered up, or bailed him out from some of the gaffes he would have made. But if you pick that debate apart, the comments are still in there, and you can still tell, where Biden stands on the issues and where the president stands on the issue. And it's pretty clear cut. I mean, they couldn't be any further apart. And, the president's on the right side of all these issues, and, in my mind, and Biden's completely on the wrong side. And he didn't want to admit a lot of it. I mean, he wants to see if he can get through this entire election without really saying what he believes. But that in itself is revealing. And so I think if, I've seen some people that have broken it down and picked the comments out and compared the comments. And I think the president handily won that debate if you do it that way. But I do think that you're right. The president was aggressive and he went after Biden on several fronts. But I think if you give Biden the rope, he will hang himself. I'm a firm believer in that. And
the what I like to call the cocktail class in Washington, D.C., they sort of look down their nose at President Trump because he's a disruptor. He's aggressive. He's combative. But I think middle America, average Americans, they like that. They want to see an argument. They don't want to see, here's your 2 minutes, and now I'm going to get my 2 minutes, and everybody goes home and forgets about it. No, they see a fighter in President Trump, and that's why that style, I believe, resonated so much across middle America. But what were you hearing from people in the district that you're running in?
Well, I think that's right. And I actually heard Bongino talking about it a little bit, and he actually broke it down, made a lot of sense to me. The way he looked at it was, this is not an election about winning, the independents, the 10% of the undecided in the middle. This is an election about winning the base, getting as much of your base out as possible. If your base generally comes out, if your base represents 40% of the electorate and usually 20% of those get out and vote, it's the kind of performance that President Trump had at the debate that will drive out another 10 to 15% of that base, which will win the election. And then you don't need the undecided to win the election anymore. And I think he's right about that. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think it goes beyond that, though. I think unless the Democrats steal this election with the mail-in ballots, the president's going to win overwhelmingly. And I say that because, with everything that's been going on in this country with the lawlessness and everything, I think there are a lot of people out there, the president has a good solid base that's going to support him, but there are other people out there that really don't like him that much. They don't want to support him. They don't want him to be their president anymore. They don't want to vote for him, but they're going to go in that voting booth. They're going to pull that curtain and they're going to vote for Donald J. Trump because the alternative is scaring the crap out of people. And if you're a small business owner, if you've got a family, I mean, you can't look at what's going on the far left in these cities like Portland and, in New York and places like that and not be scared about, where we're headed. So I hope that that's the case. I hope people come out of the woodwork, even the ones that won't admit it, and vote for him.
We've only got a couple seconds left, but you're running in the 13th district, which is West Texas, the Panhandle, Amarillo, etc. My understanding is it's a solidly Republican red district, but the Democrats are trying to claim that Texas is a swing state and it's a battleground. Is that what you're seeing in Texas?
No, I don't think so. It's not. If there's not any voter fraud here, Texas is going to be red and remain that way. Now we got some issues in Harris County, which is one of our biggest areas around the Houston area, where they're harvesting some ballots and stuff right now. So that could change things. But in general, they can talk about Texas turning blue, but it's not. Texas is solidly red, and I'm in the reddest part of Texas. I'm the #1 most conservative district in the entire United States, and we are the anchor for Texas up here. And as long as folks up in the district where I'm at get out and vote, they'll undermine the liberals that are in Austin that are voting for Biden, and we'll keep Texas red. And we're going to do that as long as they don't steal it with mail-in ballots.
Dr. Ronny Jackson, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
This is the Kyle Olson Show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. Daniel Greenfield is a Shillman Journalism Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center, and this week he wrote that while Joe Biden condemns quote-unquote violence, he won't condemn its perpetrators. Daniel joins me now. So in the previous segment, I played a barrage of clips of the media demanding Donald Trump condemn white supremacy, which he has done repeatedly over the last several years. Why won't Joe Biden condemn Black Lives Matter and Antifa?
He absolutely cannot condemn them because they're a sizable part of his base. Antifa is a more narrower group, but when you look at the organizers and the people who actually show up, who actually do door knocking, who actually serve in campaign infrastructure, as we've seen, for example, in Project Veritas videos, a whole bunch of those people are well to the radical left. If they aren't personally Antifa, they're supporters of them. And when it comes to Black Lives Matter, that is a huge chunk of the Democrat infrastructure as well. Again, while polls are showing that support for Black Lives Matter are very much fading among Americans in general, among Democrats, they're still standing very strong. Among black voters, they're still overall pretty strong. There's been a minimal loss, but we're talking single digits as far as percentages go, whereas within the country at large, there's been a pretty complete reversal. So Joe Biden absolutely cannot afford to condemn them. So what he's doing is he's playing the cynical game where he condemns violence, and nobody in the media, of course, asks him what he means by violence. Whose violence is he condemning? Violence doesn't just come out of thin air. Somebody perpetrates the violence. When he actually discusses who's perpetrating the violence, then he talks about police violence, he talks about violence from all sides, and of course he talks about right-wing violence. So he's not actually condemning violence coming from his supporters.
Well, and what we saw this week during the first presidential debate was that President Trump was again, and I played it in the last segment, he was again called on to denounce white supremacy and in these different various organizations, and he said, give me a name and I'll do it. I mean, it doesn't seem to me like he's exactly trying to hide that, but the media, Chris Wallace specifically, they're not holding Joe Biden to the same standard. We all know that the media is biased, but is there something beyond just simply the bias?
Well, it's beyond bias. It's a structural problem because the media is very much on the side of one of the sides in this combat. So Black Lives Matter has been completely thoroughly mainstreamed, endorsed, supported, and not just by the official Democrat campaign infrastructure, but very much by the media, by, for that matter, Fortune 500 companies. And when we talk about Black Lives Matter, we really mean black nationalism. Black Lives Matter is just one of the expressions of black nationalist movements, and those are movements that believe that white people are evil, believe that black people are in some way special, and that we need to fundamentally shift power from one to the other. Not equality, not Martin Luther King's content of character. That's something they specifically disavow. When you look at Black Lives Matter founders, the people they quote are Shacha Shakur, also known as Joan Chestnut, was a violent, racist, she's a fugitive in Cuba, a violent, racist terrorist who supported black nationalist movements and was willing to kill and die for them. That is their model. That is their entire agenda. So on the other hand, you have these condemnations of white nationalism, white supremacy. On the other hand, you have outright endorsements and support for black nationalism and black supremacy. And that is something Republicans really need to be able to call out. It's an area where they fundamentally failed to do so.
Why do you think they've failed to do that?
In some cases, it's a lack of knowledge, it's a lack of information. In others, they're very weary. They've been called racist so many times, they don't want to touch the subject. And in a way, there's really no sense of history. So to understand where Black Lives Matter came from, you have to look at black militant movements, black nationalist movements in the 60s and the 70s. And we're increasingly seeing a new generation that has lost touch with that history, unfortunately. And it's very important to bring that up again, which is one of the things I try to do in that essay.
Well, and I think one of the most disturbing developments in this whole, debate that we've seen play out this week is that it seems to me that Fox News has even fallen into this trap. And we saw John Roberts on Thursday. He was peppering Kayleigh McEnany at the White House about, is the president going to explicitly, on my terms, condemn white supremacy and all of that nonsense. And then he has this meltdown on camera that, he's unhappy that people are sending him messages on Twitter and he doesn't care and he thinks this is an important question and all of that. If Fox News is even heading in that direction, who is there out there to be able to say this is the reality of the situation and this whole idea that, Trump won't condemn white supremacy and all of this nonsense is a canard? Who's out there to set the record straight?
Well, we are, for one thing. I mean, when we say even Fox News behind the cameras, I'm sure is run by the same people who, for the most part, run ABC and NBC and CBS. I mean, they're dipping into the same pool of talent. And Fox News, some of the people on camera may be more conservative, but the real problem with the media, again, is structural, which is not just bias, it's that they drive the narrative. They decide which stories are important, which things do we talk about. For months and months, they insisted that the story of national riots, of so many businesses being destroyed, people being beaten, injured, and killed. Again, hundreds and hundreds of police officers have been wounded in these black nationalist riots. That was not a story that was worth discussing. But climate change is, of course, very worth discussing, and structural racism is very worth discussing. And, things like this, insisting that President Trump is very white supremacist is very worth discussing.
How did we get to this point in society where when there is going to be an announcement, last week is a good example of the Kentucky Attorney General announces what the grand jury had decided in the Breonna Taylor case. And, of course, the reaction, for whatever reason, is violence, is destruction, looting, burning, shooting police, etc. How did we get to that place in society?
Well, we got to it because we empowered radical groups. This is something that actually goes back early in the 20th century. Actually, as a matter of fact, the use of race riots as a political weapon goes back well into the 19th century as far as the Democrats are concerned. But this is something that increasingly radical leftist groups were teaming up with black nationalists 100 years ago to do this, for example, in New York during the Harlem riots. So this is something that they've had a lot of experience in doing, and they have a lot of experience in finding favorable media. The big shifts that we're seeing in the polls really involve, first of all, Republicans. Getting Republicans to actually, majority of Republicans take a negative view of Black Lives Matter is very much a recent phenomenon. Kenosha was a major turning point for a lot of people in general. So you now have Republicans and independents turning on Black Lives Matter, Democrats hardly at all. And this is really a lesson in what happens if you don't counter the lie just first up, the moment it comes out of the gate. When you wait for it to go over the top, then it's much harder to put a stop to it. This is just a larger lesson of history. Once a lie gets embedded, once people actually get committed to it, it's much harder to stop it.
We've only got a couple seconds left, but when you say the Democrats use rioting and all of that as a political tool, what are they hoping the outcome is going to be?
Well, if you go back to one of the biggest race riots in American history, those were the draft riots. They were carried out by white Democrats against Republicans and black people to prevent President Lincoln from being reelected. So it's very much the same game. They create chaos, they create anarchy, they frighten people, and they send people the messages of something that Biden has been doing, Kamala Harris have been doing. If you want the violence and the chaos to stop, you have to put the Democrats in charge. This is their message, and they're not being called on it, which is also a huge problem. I hope that at a future debate, President Trump actually confronts Biden with it, confronts Kamala Harris with it, and actually confronts Kamala Harris with the fact that she contributed to a bail fund that bailed out an attempted cop killer.
Mm-hmm. Daniel Greenfield, thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
This is the Kyle Olson Show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. Coronavirus protocols are in place. A vaccine is being developed. The economy is coming back. So what can the media possibly talk about? Nothing positive, of course. Nothing that could even remotely cast President Trump in a positive light. So let's dredge up the phony white supremacist narrative. Here's Chris Wallace at a debate in 2016, followed by Chris Wallace this week.
I totally disavow the Ku Klux Klan. I totally disavow David Duke. I've been doing it now for 2 weeks. You're probably about the 18th person that's asked me the question. It was very clear. That question was also talked about in the form of groups. I want to know, which groups are you talking about? You have to tell me which groups. Ultimately, he got to the Ku Klux Klan, which obviously I'm going to disavow. And by the way, if you look on my Twitter account, almost immediately after the program, they were disavowed again. You know, it's amazing. When I do something on Twitter, everybody picks it up, goes all over the place. But when I did this one, nobody ever picks it up. Take a look at my Twitter account.
Thank you, sir.
Hey, thank you. Thanks. Senator Rubin.
Are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, as we saw in Kenosha and as we've seen in Portland?
Sure,
are you
I'm
prepared
willing to do
specifically?
that.
Asked and answered in 2016. Asked by the same guy and answered by the same guy in 2020. But here's a montage One American News put together from 2016 and beyond, exposing the media's obsession with race and not so subtly trying to lump President Trump in with racists. It's long, but you need to hear every example.
David Duke just joined. A bigot, a racist, a problem. Would you
repudiate David Duke?
Sure.
David Duke and robocalls are out again, the white supremacist movement supporting you. Do you have any words for that?
Well, I disavow. David Duke endorsed me? Okay. All right. I disavow. Okay?
When we looked at it and looked at the question, I disavowed David Duke. So I've disavowed David Duke all weekend long on Facebook, on Twitter, and obviously it's never enough.
So are you prepared right now to make a clear and unequivocal statement renouncing the support of all white supremacists?
Of course I am. Of course I am.
When Chris joined, we had a news conference, and they asked me the exact same question. I said, I disavow. I disavowed then. I disavowed today on ABC with George Stephanopoulos. I disavowed again.
David Duke is a bad person who I disavowed on numerous occasions over the years.
I totally disavow the Ku Klux Klan. I totally disavow David Duke. Ultimately, he got to the Ku Klux Klan, which obviously I'm going to disavow. I've rejected David Duke. I've rejected the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan.
David Duke is saying to his supporters and followers, vote for Donald Trump. White supremacists are saying, vote. Do you want those votes?
No, I don't want them, and I don't want him to say it.
And you don't want the supporters?
No, I don't want anything.
What do you think of white supremacists, by the way?
I don't like any group of hate.
David Duke announced his Senate candidacy, claiming your agenda.
Are you ready before you ask the question?
Newt Gingrich said every Republican should repudiate this guy no matter what it takes.
And I do. Rebuked. Is that okay? Rebuked.
Rebuked.
Done.
Do you want white supremacists to vote for you?
No, I don't at all. Not at all.
His campaign is denouncing a show of support from the KKK's official newspaper, as in the Ku Klux Klan.
In the same New York Times interview, he denounced white supremacists. He denounced the neo-Nazis who support him.
Racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK. Neo-Nazis, white supremacists. And you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. I spoke out forcefully against hatred, bigotry, and violence, and strongly condemned the neo-Nazis, the white supremacists, and the KKK.
President Donald Trump signed a congressional joint resolution that condemns white supremacy, neo-Nazis, and other hate groups.
In one voice, our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. Any group of hate, I don't like it. Any group of hate, I am, whether it's white supremacy, whether it's any other kind of supremacy, whether it's Antifa, whether it's any group of hate, I am very concerned about it, and I'll do something about it.
How many times does one guy need to denounce this? Well, after the debate, they've concluded President Trump didn't use precisely the right words, and so now the media and their collaborators, the Democrats, are back at it. Here is Fox News reporter John Roberts on Thursday arguing with White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany. Fox News, this is where we need to stop and think about how far Fox News has fallen. Listen.
These quotes that I can go through with you, he has condemned white supremacy more than any president in modern history.
Just to clear it up this morning, can you, naming it, make a declarative statement that you denounce, that the president denounces it?
I just did. The president has denounced this repeatedly. The president was asked this. You're contriving a storyline and a narrative.
I'm just asking you to put this to rest.
I just did. I read you all of the quotes, and if you need to see them in writing, I will put them in an email. Paula.
So, Kayleigh, can you right now denounce white supremacy and the groups that espouse?
I just did. The president has denounced white supremacy, the KKK, and hate groups in all forms. He signed a resolution to that effect. The president just last week, perhaps you all weren't covering it, but just last week expressed his desire to see the KKK prosecuted as domestic terrorists. This president had advocated for the death penalty for a white supremacist, the first federal execution in 17 years. His record on this is unmistakable, and it's shameful that the media refuses to cover it. Yes.
Then after that, he ran out to the White House lawn so he could have a Jim Acosta-style meltdown live on air.
And Melissa, just one more observation here. If the president didn't know who Proud Boys were and Joe Biden just threw out the name, if he didn't know who they were, why did he denounce them? Why didn't he say, well, I don't know who they are. Can you give me a little bit more information about them and then make a decision about it? So this all remains very puzzling. And for all of you on Twitter who are hammering me for asking that question, I don't care, because it's a question that needs to be asked. And clearly, the president's Republican colleagues a mile away from here are looking for an answer for it, too. So stop deflecting. Stop blaming the media. I'm tired of it.
All right.
I'm sure John Roberts is proud of himself. He's perpetuating the phony narrative. I'm sure he'll get that invitation to the CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS cocktail party tonight. Another thing going on during the campaign this week, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris absolutely will not answer whether they support packing the Supreme Court so progressives can have a majority on the court. If and when Amy Coney Barrett is confirmed, conservatives will essentially have a 6-3 majority. If John Roberts, the Chief Justice, not the Fox News reporter, will actually act like one. Listen to this from Kamala Harris on CNN.
There are a number of Democrats in Washington, as you know, who are saying that if Judge Barrett is confirmed and if you and Joe Biden win and the Democrats take back the Senate, then there should be consideration of adding seats to the U.S. Supreme Court. Neither you nor Joe Biden are willing to give a straight answer as to whether or not you're willing to entertain that idea, but it's not some fringe idea. Democrats in Washington are talking about it. Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader in the Senate, has said that he's not taking anything off the table. Is that an idea that you're willing to think about?
We are 35 days away from an election that is probably the most important election of our lifetime and our children's lifetime. And there is nothing about these next 35 days that Joe or I will take for granted. And so the focus right now is on reminding people that we have this election that is very much in play. It is about reminding people that people are voting right now. Almost 1 million people, Jake, in our country have already voted. We are in the midst of an election, and the Republican leader of the Senate, together with Donald Trump, are in the spirit of hypocrisy trying to push through a nominee while the American people are voting. And so Joe has been really clear. Let's focus on what's happening right now. Deal with later. Focus on what's happening right now, which is the American people are voting, and they should be the ones to decide who will have the next lifetime appointment to the United States Supreme Court. Let's not get distracted. Let's be focused on what is right in front of us, because there is a lot at stake in terms of the integrity of our democracy, of our election system, and this process that should take place over the next 35 days.
I will respectfully note that you also declined to answer that question with me, Senator Kamala Harris. I appreciate your time this evening. Thank you so much.
Good to be with you, Jake. Thanks for the question.
All right, yeah.
And then there's Joe Biden talking to a local TV reporter in Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh's Action News 4 viewers are not shy about letting me know what they want me to ask you. One thing they want me to ask you is a question that came up during the debate, and that is, if you're president, would you seek to increase the number of U.S. Supreme Court nominees?
You know, that's exactly what they want me to talk about, so we don't talk about how they're violating the Constitution now. I'm not going to play Trump's game. Right now, my entire focus is seeing to it that the American people get a chance, the election's already started, to have their say in who the next Supreme Court justice is. And that's what I'm focused on.
Violating the Constitution? How is a president nominating a justice a violation of the Constitution? That's quintessentially constitutional. Joe Biden just isn't going to talk about it. He's not going to tell you where he stands on a very important issue that liberals brought up. In a huff, they were the ones who brought up adding seats to the court. Republicans didn't. There are 31 days until the election, my friends. 31 days. This is the Kyle Olson Show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. Mark Lauder is Director of Strategic Communications for the Trump campaign, and he joins me now. So, Mark, we met in Michigan last week during your stop in Muskegon. What are you hearing from voters here?
Well, I'll tell you, after that 3-day swing across the state, I saw tremendous energy for reelecting this president all across the state of Michigan. We started in the UP and ended up down by Detroit and every stop in between. And there was just such tremendous enthusiasm. These people want to get out. They're working hard. And the other thing I heard was that we saw it over and over again, that the Republican Party under Donald Trump is a party that's growing. It's a party that's attracting new people. I couldn't tell you the number of people from communities of color. You had women, you had labor union members all coming out saying, we like the results that we got in Michigan, that we're getting in America under President Trump, and we've got to keep it going because Joe Biden's plans are the exact opposite of what we need. You don't put $4 trillion in new taxes on a recovering economy. That's the way you stop job growth. It's not how you build on it.
So according to your campaign, there have been 540,000 jobs added in the last 3 months in Michigan. The president had, and prior to the pandemic, the president had an impressive economic record here. How are things turning around?
Well, we've seen it. We've seen it in Michigan. We've seen it nationally. We've nearly recovered about half of the jobs that were lost due to COVID-19. And if you look at what the experts were projecting, they were still thinking that we were going to have unemployment around 10% by the end of the year. Well, in August, which was the last numbers that were available, it was 8.4%. So we'd already shattered those expectations, and we weren't done yet. We know the growth is continuing, and the last thing we need is to put a bunch of government regulations, new taxes, and which will basically be like an anchor on this economy, and they'll send it to the bottom of the lake.
Well, that's interesting because during the debate on Tuesday, Joe Biden didn't want to answer for the tax increases he wants. He was confused that, are we talking about spending or tax increases? What are we talking about? So how would those impact places like Michigan?
Well, first and foremost, you've got to realize that Joe Biden is very clear. One of the first things he wants to do is undo the president's tax cuts. Well, 82% of Americans are going to see increased taxes if you undo the president's tax cuts. You'll also see families struggling because let's not forget, as part of the president's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, we doubled the tax write-off for children. So that's immediately going to hurt families at a time when they don't need to be paying higher taxes. They need to be getting back to work. And so, again, it's just a bad prescription, and it's just shows you that Joe Biden, he's not a moderate. He's not looking out for working men and women. I mean, this is a guy who voted for NAFTA, was a cheerleader for China, that cost us millions of jobs and cost the state of Michigan thousands of jobs, especially in manufacturing. And putting back all those regulations, putting on those new taxes, engaging in all those bad trade deals like he has a history of doing for 50 years, that's not going to help Michigan.
Well, and not just that, but the Green New Deal. Now he claims he doesn't support the Green New Deal. It's the Biden Green Deal, whatever that is. But talk about the Green New Deal and the impact that those sorts of economic and environmental policies would have on jobs in Michigan.
Well, first and foremost, it's going to drive up the cost of your electricity. It's going to drive up the cost of heating and cooling your home or supplying power to those major manufacturing facilities that are so reliant. So that's a deterrent. But then also because of all the regulations, look what's going on. They're talking about eliminating gasoline-powered cars. You've already seen them sign a law in California to ban them. I mean, that's not going to help Michigan. And so it also, I would tell you, look at what we've done under the new USMCA. The USMCA replaced that horrible NAFTA deal that Joe Biden supported. And the USMCA requires more of the parts that are going into American-made cars to be made in America. It actually forces manufacturers in Canada and Mexico to raise their rate, to raise their pay. So American companies can compete and win. These are all good things for America. They're good things for auto manufacturing, and that's why we're seeing so many great companies and great suppliers coming back to America because they don't want to deal with all of the nonsense that we're seeing going on overseas.
So another point during the debate, Joe Biden sort of downplayed what we have seen in Michigan in terms of manufacturing, specifically the auto industry. And he made a comment that basically the auto industry has disappeared, which I found absolutely stunning and completely untrue. But talk about the president's record when it comes to manufacturing and the auto industry in Michigan.
Well, again, it just shows you once again that Joe Biden really doesn't even know what he's talking about, and he doesn't really even know his own plans. At one minute he's claiming to save the auto industry when he was vice president, but then says the auto industry is going away. And we know the opposite is true. We have seen new investments in the automotive sector in the state of Michigan, whether it is General Motors, whether it's Fiat Chrysler, that are all adding major new plants to the state of Michigan. We'll see suppliers following, and we're going to see more and more suppliers following if we keep the pro-jobs plans that President Trump has in place. And I think that's one of the reasons why, as I was traveling across Michigan, that I saw so many people coming out telling me openly that they are members of labor unions and that their union leaders are doing what they always do, supporting Democrats, but the men and women who actually work on the line, who are actually working for a living, they support this president because they know this president's fighting for their jobs.
Right. And Joe Biden on Wednesday night gave a speech in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, which is Cambria County, which is one of those counties that swung from Obama-Biden to Trump in 2016. And he had tried to make this claim that basically, the president doesn't understand, working people, those very people that you're talking about. And Joe Biden made this claim that he doesn't own a single stock and that people, he basically went into politics as the poorest member of the Senate, and you're not supposed to make money in politics, which sort of was stunning to me because then you read the allegations about his son and his other members of his family. But tell me a little bit about how Joe Biden and his family have profited from his time in politics.
Well, there's no question it's Biden Inc. I mean, it's a family business, and they're all basically corrupt and taking money, where they shouldn't be. I mean, why was Hunter Biden getting paid $3.5 million by the wife of the former mayor of Moscow while the time Joe Biden was vice president? I mean, what did Hunter Biden have that needed $3.5 million? Why did the Chinese government set up a slush fund for Hunter Biden and Joe Biden's brother to go traveling around the world in? I mean, we know the deal about Ukraine getting $83,000 a month when he had no experience in energy, no experience in the Ukraine, didn't even speak the language. I mean, you have to ask yourself these questions. And, of course, we all know about the $1.5 billion that Hunter Biden got from China a week and a half after he got off of Air Force Two, traveling with his then vice president father to China. I mean, again, no experience in China, no experience in any of these industries, and yet he's getting $1.5 billion here, $3.5 million from a Russian oligarch, $83,000 a month from the Ukraine, and it just adds up to a pattern of corruption, profiteering like we've never seen. And one other thing about Joe Biden and his so-called, how he knows about blue collar, he said it in Michigan a couple of times. He actually lied to the face of people in Michigan when he was standing in Detroit a few weeks ago, and he said that he'd never made over $400,000 a year, and that his tax increases would not impact. Well, when they released their taxes last week before the debate, it showed he made $1 million last year. Not under 400,000, $1 million. So Joe Biden can't even be honest with the people of Michigan. He goes there and tells them a bold-faced lie that he's never made over $400,000, and yet a week later he shows that he actually made $1 million last year. I mean, what do you buy from Joe Biden?
Well, and I did a fact check of that for Breitbart, and I found that in the 2 years after leaving the White House, he made almost $16 million on a book deal and speaking fees and all of that sort of thing. And then the other point, I think, is that, he it just seems like such a huge disconnect between reality and what we're seeing play out in the media. What do you think the reaction would be in the media if a Donald Trump Jr. or an Eric Trump or another member of the Trump family was caught receiving a $3.5 million wire transfer from the wife of the former mayor of Moscow?
It would be nonstop coverage. It would be breathless. It would be a constitutional crisis, according to the mainstream media. But when it happens to Joe Biden, they just yawn and look the other way. I mean, it's complete malpractice of journalism. And I used to be a journalist. I spent the first 15 years in my post-college career working in journalism, including in West Michigan, where I got a couple of my first jobs right out of college. And it's just a complete abject a failure of them to abide by their own journalistic standards, that they look the other way when it involves the Bidens, but they're breathless about everything involving President Trump.
Mark Lauder, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me today. For more of my work, go to Breitbart.com or find me on Twitter, Kyle Olson 4. Use the same handle for Parler, Kyle Olson 4, KYLEOLSON and the number 4. This is the Kyle Olson Show.